Oh, excuse me. I was wanted to have a look at a few scriptures today, inspired by Brother Bobby's talk about the crucifixion of Jesus. It's going to be a nice, easy little Bible study today. We're just going to be in Luke and John. Um, we'll start in Luke chapter 23 and verse 13. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. And they all cried at once, saying, Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them, but they shouted, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Then he said to them the third time, Why, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. Um, so after reading this, the thing that really struck out to me was that that um they were like so you know offended and opposed to what Jesus taught and just his existence, that they would prefer a convicted criminal be released to them over the Son of Man. That his like Jesus's existence on earth was so offensive to them that they would rather have, a murderer and a criminal be released than Jesus, who they falsely accused. And, just like how far they had lost their way, that they just utterly rejected Jesus and his teachings, and just so, you know, that they didn't want to, I guess, they would rather face, you know, face a murderer and just believe that their sins, they didn't have any sin and they were clean, rather than face the fact that they had sin and that Jesus was there to take that sin away. Because for Jesus to be there to take their sin away, they would have to first admit that they were living in sin, and it'd be easier to release a murderer and put Jesus to death than face that fact head on. And I kind of just draw parallels today with how misguided our legal system is, and people getting released from prison or not being held accountable for their actions. And it's easier for these people to be let out rather than actually have to face consequences. And it's just how backwards the world has gone, as it has been moving away from Jesus. Like, people have turned their backs on God, and you can tell just by looking at the events of the world and what's going on around us, that people are miserable, they're scared, they don't have direction. And fortunately, we have been put in a place where we can observe that, and we don't have to be in that place, because we have the truth in us. Like, we have received the Holy Spirit. We are walking in Jesus, so we can observe these things and don't have to be scared of them or worried about them. So that was the one kind of parallel And then we'll go on to John chapter 18. And it's kind of reading the different accounts of the crucifixion through the gospel. It's kind of interesting to see what the different perspectives were, and the different lessons we can draw from them. So going chapter 18 and verse 28. Uh, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." So just that in and of itself, you know, they hated him so much and wanted him to be put to death, but they couldn't justify it. That basically they came to Pilate and said, and he's like, "Why are you guys bringing him to me?" It's like, just trust us. He did so. If he wasn't a bad guy, we wouldn't have brought him to you. So here you go, judge him and put him to death for us. In verse 31, then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, in which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die." So now Pilate and the Jews are playing hot potato with Jesus. Like, they're like, "Here, you deal with him," and Pilate's like, "No, you guys judge him." And he's like, "No, we don't want to. We can't put him to death. You need to do that." So they're trying to argue in amongst themselves. Um, then Pilate entered into the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Then Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" So we got a bit of a exchange between Jesus and Pilate here. In verse 36, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all." So, obviously, you got the Jews here, and Pilate was, a Roman judge, and the way I'm kind of looking at it, the Jews brought Jesus to Pilate, saying, he's basically trying to trick Pilate into finding fault in him. That he's saying, well, Jesus says he's a king, so like you have the Jewish law, and then you have like the Roman law, and so Pilate's kind of asking Jesus about that, trying to determine if Jesus is actually a threat to Caesar and the Roman Empire, or if it's something more. And that's when he's asking about his kingdom, and that's when Jesus tells him that his kingdom is not of this world, and that, his basically putting his mind at ease that no, Jesus is not there to overthrow the Roman government. He's talking about something higher than anything on this earth. And so after the conversation backwards and forward, Pilate determined that no, Jesus hasn't broken any laws, and doesn't deserve to be put to death. And then in verse 39, But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release you the king of the Jews? That Then they all cried again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Um, we'll just skip down to verse 5. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Therefore, when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again unto the praetorium and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Are you are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and power to release you? Then Jesus said, You could have you could have no power at all against me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. So, at that point, um, in this, in John's account, that the Jews were so bent on crucifying Jesus that they would take Barabbas to be set free. And at that point, Pilate kind of realizes this, that these guys are going to crucify Jesus, whether I'm involved with it or not. So he kind of bent the knee to the Jews, kind of appeasing the crowd, because he knew if he didn't crucify Jesus, then they'd be coming for him next. So, but we all know that it had to happen this way. So like Jesus said, that a host of angels could have come down and saved him from the cross, but that wasn't part of God's plan. And so we can read all of this, knowing the aftermath and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But it's just kind of interesting to get a picture of the mindset of the Jews, and why they opposed Jesus so much. And we can see that in how we get opposed these days. The people will do any kind of mental gymnastics to try and convince themselves that they're right with God. And we can offer them the truth, and it's so simple, like the what God has told us to receive the Holy Spirit is like such a simple answer, and yet people come up with all of these reasons as to why they don't want to do it. Whether they're happy with their life the way it is, or they don't want to, they don't want to give up sinning and stuff because it feels good now, but they don't have the common sense to know that it's not gonna last long term. But anyway, I just wanted to have a look at those scriptures, and it's just such a comfort to know that we have the Holy Spirit within us. We have a personal relationship with God, and that we don't have to worry about the world and how it's being corrupted, like that we've been set on a pedestal above it all, so we don't have to be afflicted by it. Like, I know we still live in the world and we have to go about our lives day to day, but we have it with the peace of God on our side, knowing that we're going to be saved when the Lord returns. So I like to leave those thoughts there.